Well, welcome everybody. Welcome this evening to the New York Society for Art and Culture. My name is Richard Coral. I'm one of the leaders here at New York Society. And we are really proud to present this panel discussion, which is being co-sponsored and in large part prepared by Amnesty International, New York City chapters. This is an area which is an eternal area of development and danger. It's not an area where you can easily say, we got to write a law, because we have laws, we have constitutional amendments, we have international treaties, we have a tremendous amount of preparation in law enforcement. What we seem to need now is public awareness. We need to be able to recognize the problem to help our fellow people, citizens, who are caught in situations that are so, I was going to look for another word other than evil, but I can't find another word.
When I was 7 years old, I was traveling from my home in Togo into Ghana by my own uncle, as part of an age-old practice called Chocolonely, a form of slavery and trafficking that is still practiced in West Africa. I was freed in 1997 through the work of International Needs Ghana and a well-known international journalist, Christian Amanpour. 20 years later, in 2017, I was reunited with her in Ghana. And in that same year, I had the opportunity to narrate my own story in a documentary commissioned by the BBC called My Stolen Childhood. I now work as an associate producer with Refine Creative, a production company in Accra, Ghana. At Refine Creative, we tell stories. We create original African content for international clients. I am passionate about promoting the power of owning one's narrative to change mainstream perspectives. For tonight's program, we have brought together a distinguished panel to help us better understand aspects of the complex, multifaceted issue of human trafficking. I am very pleased to welcome Christine Okike as moderator.
Thank you, Brigitte, for sharing your story. I had the pleasure of actually watching your documentary earlier this week, and it's truly inspirational to see all that you've accomplished. I think we can all say that we admire your courage and your commitment to share your story with others in the fight to help end trafficking. So we have an incredible panel for you this evening. Our goals are to discuss how human trafficking is hidden in our communities, to delve into the complexities of the issue, and also to provide channels for action so that you can leave today with thoughts about how you can help combat the issue.
I want to thank everyone so much for coming, and particularly Andrea Wolper and Paul Levis, who worked so hard to put this incredible panel together. And that was such a moving story from you. Thank you so much, and we look forward to working with you. We thought slavery, was eradicated with the Emancipation Proclamation, but truly there are more slaves in the world today than any time in history. And this is the #1 human rights issue of our time. I want to give you a little background on how we got involved. So I founded Airline Ambassadors as the only independent charity of the airline aviation industry to help vulnerable children back in 1996. I was based here as a flight attendant. And we decided to use our past privileges to help children. We became an NGO with the United Nations. We escorted children for medical care and hand-delivered aid to children in need around the world. Next slide. On humanitarian missions every month, we saw vulnerable children, But we didn't know anything about the dark reality of human trafficking until we were on a mission in Cambodia, and we met this little girl on the right. She had drawn clothes on her own body with a red marking pen because she had been abandoned by her mother, who worked in the karaoke bars in Rivard. The people living above her said, "Oh, a trafficker will pick her up tonight." We gave her that orange balloon and we turned to go. And she put her little hand up to say hi, and we thought, we can't leave that little girl. So we ended up getting her to a doctor who said we just got her before malnutrition had set in, and we got her into a safe house. And she's 12 years old now, and she's doing great. We named her Son Name, which means lucky in Khmer. We learned on that trip about the dark reality of human trafficking. Next slide. And so the following month, this was 2009, we went to the Dominican Republic and do what we always do. We gave out aid and medical supplies to children and toys to children. But our team of 12 people talked about human trafficking and promised each other to be aware on flights out. On all 4 airlines out, we correctly identified human trafficking. In every case, the flight attendant, when we told the flight attendants, they said, well, we don't know what to do. And we said, we do. Radio ahead, and have the captain tell the ground personnel. Our first tip on JetBlue led to the bust of a pornography ring in Boston saving 86 children. We knew then we were onto something. Next slide. We knew from personal experiences that traffickers use commercial aviation. They use all forms of transportation, planes, cars, buses, but they use transportation because it's easy and it keeps the victim powerless. So we went to Congressman Smith, and we knew the aviation industry needed to be trained. We went to Congressman Smith, the author of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, the first legislation in the United States, and said, please help us reach out to airlines. And so we did. We had our first briefing in 2009, and then another one that year, or 2010, two briefings, and nothing changed. So we developed the first industry-specific training on human trafficking awareness, which we've now implemented 75 times, well actually 76, we just did one in Miami on Monday. So we have now trained 7,000 frontline personnel. Each 100 flight attendants sees 500 people a week, 2,000 a month, 24,000 a year. That means we're able to, just from our trainings alone, mobilize eyes and ears that can report important information to law enforcement and save lives of 1.2 million passengers. So our work, among other things, led to the FAA reauthorization bill of 2016, and that mandates that flight attendants be trained. We're now working to strengthen that bill so that pilots and agents and all frontline personnel, actually all travelers, can be trained. I flew in today on American Airlines. I had to fly out early too. But inside they gave us a full-page ad, which reads, every day 68,000 victims are trafficked right in front of your eyes. Not on commercial flights, not only from troubled communities or countries, they include children of people you know, and each one of us can play a part in recognizing and reporting human trafficking. We created a tip line app, which is free on Google and iTunes, where you can download every number that's needed for doing this. And we got that number, so people know, from the latest research from the International Labor Organization, International Organization of Migration, and Walk Free, estimating 24.9 victims. We took the more conservative number, million victims every year, and we divided it by 12, just to shock people of the reality every day of trafficking here in New York, as well as cities around the world. Thank you very much.
I'm a journalist with the New York Post. The bulk of my work focuses on investigative, long-form work. Earlier this year, I did a long-form series with a team of reporters, wonderful people, who we worked on sex trafficking specifically. I've also recently done some work into labor trafficking. So a lot of what I know about is about sex trafficking, but I also can speak a little bit about labor as well. So one of the things I'm here to talk about tonight is the way that traffickers use the web and the way that they use technology to exploit more and more people every single year. So let's go to that. From the streets to the web. So one of the things about technology, about trafficking, is that it's driven trafficking indoors and online, meaning it's easier to conceal, harder to catch. So with the typical image of sex trafficking in the past, you might think of a girl walking down a dark street, stilettos, a short dress, and some car idling by, someone seeking to buy her. And yes, this definitely still does happen, but it's become a lot more sophisticated. So with labor trafficking, it's the same kind of thing. Something you'll see about labor trafficking tonight, and I think some people on our panel might know a little bit more about it, so I won't go too much into it, but it's one of the most mundane crimes that are happening right now. And not mundane in suffering, but mundane in appearance, because it's happening right now, right in front of your faces, and none of us have any idea that it's going on. So we can go back to that. So the typical way, like just in the past, the way a labor trafficker seeks a person to exploit is the same way that an employer seeks an employee. It's someone looking for a job. So you're going to find that friends, word of mouth, other employees, job listings in the local newspaper, could be anything like that. So with the rise of technology, trafficking has become easier. You can swipe on a couple clicks on your phone and order up a domestic trafficking victim, guised as a prostitute or an escort, right to your house within a couple of hours, maybe even less than that. It's become faster. You can instantly message with whoever you're seeking to buy, whoever you're seeking to exploit. You have instant messaging, you have email, you have texting, you have all this kind of stuff. And then it's also become bigger. There is no shortage on the web for people to buy, sell, and advertise exploited people. So first we can talk about sex trafficking online now. So one of the big things about sex trafficking is where you are, where your daughters are, where your sons are, where your friends are, traffickers are. And a lot of that is on social media. A lot of our research came from interviewing lots of members of the Vice Unit from the NYPD, lots of prosecutors, things like that. And one of the things that we asked the NYPD was, how has social media influenced human trafficking? And they said it absolutely has increased human trafficking. We spoke with an organization, Love 146, who works with trafficking victims out of Connecticut, and they said that the internet has made every child online susceptible and accessible to traffickers. And just to put this into context, someone that we spoke with from the Queens DA, they had been prosecuting sex trafficking crimes for the last decade. And they told us that the very first sex trafficking case that they prosecuted, the trafficker met the victim on MySpace. So that just goes to show you that as soon as youth were online, as soon as vulnerable youth were online, traffickers were there ready to exploit them. And so I also have catfishing and trickery up there, because social media and the internet in general makes it a lot easier to trick people into conceal your identity, trick people into doing something that they may not be really interested in doing. And the Bronx DA told us this really interesting story about a trafficker who was actually pretending to be a woman online. Their photograph was of a woman, their name was of a woman, and they were actually able to mimic their voice so much to the point that it was an uncanny resemblance to a woman. So you have an exploited person talking to a fellow woman about a job opportunity, and then all of a sudden you show up and it's not what you had signed up for, and it's a much different situation. So in addition to social media, that's where the bulk of recruiting and grooming is happening for sex trafficking victims. When you think about sex trafficking, you might think of the kind of Taken scenario, a girl getting thrown in a van, getting chained to a pipe, gun to her head, dad sending money to come rescue her out of this foreign Eastern European country or something like that. And yes, this does happen, but it's a lot more subtle, it's a lot more nuanced than that. It's all about relationship building, it's all about building connections. So something that, from Love 146, who works exclusively with youth, they gave us an example of how this happens. A trafficker might go on Facebook and look for a bunch of kids that go to a certain middle school in their area. And then they're going to add all of those kids. And then by the time they're showing up in a vulnerable youth inbox or a friend request, you have 30 mutual friends by then. And because youth have a tendency to really put a lot of weight into the amount of friends that they have, the amount of followers that they're getting, the amount of likes that they have, they're a lot more likely to accept someone that they may not necessarily know, but hey, you've got mutual friends, right? So I'm going to accept them. And then now this person is liking your post, they're commenting, they're maybe sending some heart reactions, right? You're getting that kind of clout, those notifications, you're getting used to them. And then NYPD really put it perfectly. Predators are watching and they're listening and they're friending. So they're paying attention when that youth is talking about, I really wish I got into the soccer team, or my parents keep fighting, like I wish I didn't have to live here, or I'm having trouble finding a job, I want some money to get out of here. So they're paying attention to those things. And now all of a sudden they're in your inbox and they have a ticket out and they have a way for you to help those problems. So that's the building connections part. It's very subtle, getting inside your head. And so we had a story to kind of bring that to light in the Manhattan TA. You know, this very same day that we were speaking with them, they had been working on a trafficking case. And there was a trafficker who was recruiting teens out of Pennsylvania in North Carolina. And he was offering them money for a bus ticket to New York City. Come with me and live your dreams. You know, the streets are paved with gold. You can flash a nice car, big fat wad of cash. Hey, listen, I've got a job for you. We can work this out. Come to the big city. And social media is a lot easier to sell that dream. So we're seeing that a lot. So in addition to recruiting and grooming, technology and the internet is the main buyer's marketplace. It has dramatically changed the sale of prostitution and domestic trafficking victims and international trafficking victims as well. So, you know, I have a quote here from the Manhattan TA that in the last 5 to 8 years, there's been an explosion of the online prostitution community. All you need is a $20 burner phone, a $6 Backpage ad, and you can open up shop in the world's fastest growing criminal marketplace. And I know you hear me say Backpage, yes, I know that the feds shut down Backpage, but you better believe that the very next day, alternatives to Backpage were spiking in Google searches. I have a whole list here of alternatives. There's Backpage.ly, Backpage.ca. There's a whole website devoted to Johns who are searching for the best alternatives to Backpage. And I have a quote here from Rachel Lloyd, who's a fantastic woman who's done a ton of work with domestic trafficking victims with her organization, GEMS. I'm sure a lot of you guys know her. There's always going to be criminal facilitators who are more than happy to facilitate this stuff and make whatever money that Backpage can make. And we're already seeing that happening. Okay, and so labor trafficking online. Again, labor trafficking is something that is hiding in plain sight. It's something that is very basic. It's somebody seeking work. So the same way that a regular person seeking a job, you're going to go on a job board. So online listings like Craigslist, like new opportunities. Okay, this sounds interesting. It's online. It's legit. So they're using things like Craigslist. And then besides job boards, they're also using websites. One of the first things that you might do when you're looking for a job is go to the company's website. You want to see that they're legit. You see that this new job opportunity is coming up. All right, what is this company all about? I'm going to research their website and what they're doing. And traffickers know this. So they're creating fake websites so that this job opportunity is perfectly legitimized. Like, they have a website. Look at what they do. You can click right on it. I mean, we all put a lot of weight into things like that. I mean, they're online. It must be legit, right? So besides that, they're also using social media. In the same way that a sex trafficking victim or a sex trafficking recruiter will recruit young women and young men into the sex trafficking industry, you're gonna see the exact same thing with labor trafficking. You know, you're posting, like, maybe, and even with a lot of adults, like, hey, couldn't buy my son this Christmas gift this year, money's a little tight, landlord's really riding me right now. And then all of a sudden, hey, I've got this great opportunity for you. Pay me $500 and I'll get you in. So then you have the debt bondage coming in. And it's the same idea. You're building those relationships on social media, looping them into a point where you're too far to get out. So overall, technology has dramatically changed the human trafficking landscape. It's made it bigger, worse, and it's something that we all need to pay attention to because every single person in this room has probably met a victim who's seen it and you weren't aware of it. And now we can all know more about it. Thank you so much for your time.
And so I'm going to talk a little bit about labor trafficking in general, take a little bit of a look at agriculture and what has happened in Florida as a case study of what labor trafficking can look like, and then talk about how the coalition, which is made up of farm workers who are from Mexico, Guatemala, and Haiti, have actually been able to prevent human trafficking largely in the Florida tomato industry and now beginning up the East Coast as well, in a sector that was once called ground zero for human trafficking in agriculture in America. So I want to give you a sense of success and why businesses might also want to be interested in what our role for consumers is. So I thought the video we started with was great because it gave you a sense of the scope of what trafficking looks like, and we see a lot of that here in the United States. Slavery exists in many, many industries here in the United States. Labor trafficking can be found on farms, in nursing homes, in hotels, in construction, restaurant workers, domestic workers, state fairs, magazine selling crews, anywhere where you have workers in vulnerable situations who might owe their employers a debt, might be working in someone's home that gets them out of normal social networks. People who are vulnerable. The federal definition of trafficking under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act is someone who is held in their place of work through force, fraud, or coercion. And which is the name of our program tonight. And those three pieces are really important because we might often think today, well, if someone isn't chained up, if a gun isn't being held to their head, why are they staying in this situation? Why are they remaining a trafficking victim? And they might be staying because someone has threatened their family back home. They might owe an enormous debt to their trafficker and think that they need to stay until they've worked it off. They might have gotten into their situation through fraud. They came over to the United States being promised a job in one industry at one wage and paid a lot of money to come here, and they get here and discover the job is different, or there is no job, and now they're in debt. And so we see all of these elements in labor trafficking. Not all bad labor situations are trafficking situations. It's important to stress that. Labor trafficking exists on a continuum, right? We see labor trafficking among the workers in the United States who are most vulnerable, and the fact that we're starting to see it expand to other industries says less about trafficking itself and more about the fact that these days more and more workers see their jobs being insecure. Two of the industries in the United States where we see the most forced labor are, of course, jobs that were left out of the National Labor Relations Act and lack some of the basic protections that workers have, which are home health aides, nannies, all kinds of domestic work, and then agricultural laborers. And why is that? Because when the New Deal was passed in the 1930s, most of those jobs were held by African Americans, and in order to get Southern senators to support the New Deal, they were left out of a lot of labor protections we saw past then, and now we're living with that legacy today. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that in more and more industries. While many labor trafficking victims are people who are undocumented, and certainly that creates a situation where people are even more vulnerable to abuse if your employer threatens you, right? That if you complain that your wages are being withheld, that you're being sexually abused or threatened with harassment. We had situations in the Florida fields where we had crew chiefs who were, shooting guns off in the field. That if you threaten to complain, that you might get, that they'll turn you over to the police so you can get deported, or they'll threaten you with that, right? So that, and you don't know that that's illegal for them to do. You're just worried, and you owe them this massive debt. Ending labor recruitment fees is actually one of the biggest things we can do to end trafficking in the United States, because it would mean that people who came to work here were less vulnerable. Unless we think that these are only situations that affect undocumented workers, a lot of people who are here on guest worker visas are also highly vulnerable to trafficking. One of the biggest labor trafficking cases in the United States, US versus Global Horizons, happened in 2010, and it involved Thai guest workers. More than 600 of them who were on farms in 13 states. They were promised one job, they paid a big fee to come here, they came to the United States, their passports were held, and they were held in slave-like conditions. So it's really important to understand that even in today's political environment where there's a lot of talk about how workers come to our country, that simply coming to the United States on a visa does not guarantee that you will not be trafficked. The ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center prosecuted a really big case among guest workers who come over to work on pipeline repair after Hurricane Katrina and used anti-trafficking laws to prosecute labor violations. So in agriculture, there's a possibility that any single one of us every day might be eating something that was a product of human trafficking. And I think this is one way in which, what some of the other panelists have talked about, how this is in front of us every day. We kind of know probably if we are trafficking our home health aide or our au pair, but we aren't necessarily aware of human rights abuses in our supply chains, right? Because there's no incentive for us to know. We're all kind of where probably bad things happen in supply chains, and the problems of human rights abuses in the supply chains of every product we buy is a whole other conversation. But we are consumers and we eat goods, and yet we don't necessarily know a lot about the people who work in those industries. The co-founder of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, Laura Germino, estimates that in Florida, 5 to 10% of the workers in Florida agriculture are trafficked. And there's a history in Florida that you can see from traditional chattel slavery to convict leasing and debt bondage, and then today's modern day slavery operations. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the documentary from the 1960s, Harvest of Shame. But in that documentary, which looked simply at agricultural workers in Florida, one of the farmers said, we used to own our slaves and now we just rent them. Because that was how they viewed their workers. As simply, people who they could exploit, people who they could pay very low wages to. And what happened when the coalition was founded in the 1990s is they started hearing cases not just of abusive farm conditions, but situations where people were being held in things that met the conditions for human trafficking. So, a situation where someone was recruiting homeless African Americans from shelters in Miami and taking them up to a farm camp in northern Florida, and then basically keeping them addicted to drugs and alcohol, charging them very high rates. They were selling them that, and they were supposed to take it out of their paycheck, and they could never earn it back. A case where workers were being held in the middle of the Florida Everglades, so even if they, in a camp with barbed wire. So even if they escaped, they would have no idea where they were. And I've been to that camp, it's now I think a trailer park, and I don't know if I escaped from there, I wouldn't know where I was. And the most recent case that they dealt with in 2008, where workers were being held in the back of a truck, were being chained in the back of a truck. Again, it's only a very small percentage of workers, but it could happen because in general, human rights conditions on the farms were very bad. And the growers would say, well, we subcontract to crew chiefs. The big corporations at the top of the supply chain would say, we don't own these farms. It's not our responsibility. So what happened? One was that thanks to the work of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers and a lot of other anti-trafficking organizations, the Trafficking Victim Protection Act was passed in the year 2000. That's really important. It was bipartisan legislation, which we don't really see very much these days, but it was from people from both parties, and it updated American anti-trafficking laws that hadn't been changed since the 1860s. So here it is, all these things that we've talked about on the panel tonight, our laws didn't reflect these new understandings of what trafficking looks like. But the other was that the coalition created a program called the Fair Food Program, which took them a good 20 years to get implemented on the farms, but is a really good example of what happens when the people who are most affected by human rights issues design the solutions. And the Fair Food Program requires that all the growers in Florida who sell to 14 major corporations, that's the incentive for the growers, agree to third-party human rights monitoring on their farms. That include things that all of us would probably like, the ability to complain about human rights abuses without fear of retribution, a 24-hour complaint hotline staffed by people who are bilingual. They do spot visits on the farms to make sure, and where they talk to half of the workers on the farm without the employers present. And the fact that the growers have to do this actually means that there's an effectiveness to it. The Fair Food Program is basically, which eliminated trafficking in Florida. It was implemented on 90% of Florida's tomato farms in the year 2011, and since then they've found exactly one trafficking case. And that happened because a worker was able to escape and call the hotline and say, I am being trafficked, here's the conditions on the farm, and they were able to work with the Department of Justice to arrest the people involved. So if you look at, and that means that we're talking about tens of thousands of agricultural workers in Florida who are now covered by human rights protections that aren't something that the farm says, oh, that's great, we agree to this, but that have actual legal weight and that also have market consequences. If there's abuse on your tomato farm and you don't deal with it, you can no longer sell to McDonald's and 13 other major corporations. So you have to create incentive, but for the growers, it's actually also created a plus because it's good for your farms if you're not constantly on the front pages of the newspaper because there's a trafficking case on your farm. So I think this is an important moment. We have to think not just when I started doing this work, I met with a group who had come over through the State Department from Israel. They were a bunch of attorneys and DAs, and they were trying to learn, they had done a lot in Israel on sex trafficking. They were trying to learn how to solve labor trafficking, and they came to me and said, we don't think you guys have solved it either. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. You have to wait till that, that person sees someone who's in trouble and reports it. And that's really important, but when you have an opportunity to do prevention at an industry-wide level by holding the growers accountable and involving the corporations who buy from those growers, it can create change for tens of thousands of people. Thank you.
Everything they say is true. In regards to flight attendants, we had a case, first and foremost, so let me just go back a step. The Vice Division falls under the Detective Bureau in the New York City Police Department. The New York City Police Department is made of 8 police patrol boroughs, not 5 boroughs as the residents live in. It's broken up. Every borough is broken into 2 boroughs, except for Bronx and Staten Island. So in the Vice Division, we have vice modules that handle complaints on prostitution, gambling, illicit clubs, illicit massage parlors. And then I'm in charge of the Vice Division Major Case Section. Under my command, I have the NYPD, FBI, Human Trafficking and Child Exploitation Task Force. I have the Homeland Security Public Safety Task Force. I also have the New York City Human Trafficking Citywide Team, which has 9 detectives, 1 sergeant, 1 lieutenant. So I have a bunch of other units, but they don't really focus on human trafficking. So human trafficking, what is it, where is it, who is it, what does it look like? It looks like all of you. It looks like me. It looks like 12-year-old girls. It looks like 10-year-old girls. Social media, I can't speak enough about social media. I was at an event last week with Ricky Martin. I don't know if anybody knows who Ricky Martin is. And he's doing a lot on human trafficking as well. A lot of the stuff is overseas. But in New York City, the majority of our cases are sex trafficking cases with young girls, young boys. How does it start? Where does it start? It starts in school. It starts on Instagram. It starts on Snapchat. It starts on your Halo game on PS4, which are all interactive with other users. And as Ricky Martin said, he has 2 children, which I learned, I think Valentino and Mateo. And somebody friends Mateo, and he says, oh, my dad's Ricky Martin. Great, this guy's like, great. They're coming into your house, these traffickers, through your television, through your video game system, but mostly through the Wi-Fi. And if I could stress to anybody in here who has young children, whether it's male or female, you need to be on top of their social media. As Gabrielle was saying, friending, so what is Facebook, what is Instagram, what is Snapchat? These are all social media platforms where these guys and gals hide behind because they think that they're anonymous, right? But nobody's really anonymous. You're hooking into an IP address, wherever that might be, the local Starbucks, the school cafeteria, a police station, wherever that might be, in Mexico, in wherever, in Russia. It could be anywhere. And what happens is, to work these cases, basically we're working backwards. And that's not an easy thing to do. Every case is like a murder because you're starting with so much information and just, talking about social media. To get this information, you're getting search warrants going through hundreds of thousands of pages of data that these people think nobody can see. But it's all there. You just have to take the time to read through, which can take long periods of time. So the sex trafficking doesn't know demographics, it doesn't know social status, it doesn't know boundaries of New York City, North Carolina. We just had a case in the paper where this individual from Jamaica, Queens, enticed a girl from Australia, a 16-year-old girl from Australia who didn't even have a passport. She cons her parents into getting a passport to go on a school trip where our predator, Sean Price, who now is doing 35 years, entices this young 16-year-old girl to LAX, where he's waiting for her in a rent-a-car, and drives her across the country, You know, I'm not going to get into the graphic details of this, but you can see where I'm going. You know, this is all through social media, and you know, sex trafficking goes hand in hand with the buyer, right? So we work hand in hand with all the NGOs, non-for-profits, GEMS, Restore, to name a few of the larger ones. And the biggest issue we have in New York City is when we're out there at 5 o'clock in the morning recovering somebody's 12-year-old daughter, what do we do with them? They're from North Carolina. They're from California. Where are we putting this person? So, you know, to have these resources available, because I'm not going to get into the system that's in place of where the children will go if nobody comes for them. It gets kind of, I don't want to get into the weeds with that. But the demographics, it crosses everywhere. Everybody thinks it's a certain type of people, a certain class, and it's not. We had an alert, I don't know what you call the girl at the counter that does when you go to get on a plane. Counter person?
The agent.
The agent. In, I want to say it was either San Diego, it was just recently, right? So that's over the summer, I believe, or before the summer. What happens is a trafficker from New York buys her a ticket, her and her friend, a one-way ticket from Sacramento to New York City, JFK, I believe it was. Only to realize that that ticket was purchased with what? Because usually these crimes go hand in hand with other crimes, right? Everybody just sees the one crime, but it's going with grand larcenies, stolen credit cards to buy the airline ticket, right? The alert ticket agent notifies the local policeman that's standing there in the airport. Hey, I think something's wrong. This ticket is canceled. It was bought with a stolen credit card, right? So we, again, I have the FBI team, so I have no limitation on where I'm going across the United States of America. And with the Homeland Security team, I have a Europe and Asia team, and I also have a North America, South America team. So I kind of have it all covered, but you know, it's a big world out there, and you know, there's limited resources. But it's people like everyday citizens, the ticket agent, you know, the person you're buying your ice from in the street. I mean, I can tell stories all day long on what kind of cases. We've had diplomat cases where a guy is locked in the attic in Queens doing basically, you know, a house slave. He was brought over here under this auspice of you're going to make good money and you'll be able to send that money home. And once he got to America, that contract was terminated. He was locked in the attic. And that's, you know, how that went until the State Department gets involved. And anybody knows about diplomats, it's not an easy process. There's a lot of immunity issues that you can basically, you know, commit crimes and basically go unpunished for all intents and purposes. So there's slavery issues like that. There's the person that you might be buying your hot dog from. As Ricky Martin said last week, the people making your shoes, your iPhone, your chocolate. It's all over the place. But in New York City, we're dealing mostly with sex trafficking because labor in and of itself in New York City is legal. Many people don't come forward to report they're being abused by an employer and stuff of this nature. We've had cases with the people selling ices on the street. It's hard to get people to cooperate. They're a little hesitant. Another facet would be like massage businesses, right? Everybody sees the massage business, and you know, for some odd reason, the windows are all covered up. You know, that's by design. You know, that's by design. There's other things going on in that location, and there's a lot of massage places in New York City. You know, there's the debt. You know, come to America. There's another lady that's a human trafficking victim who was brought here from China that speaks at a lot of events. And she was basically, you know, promised a better life, and she was basically enslaved for a while. Till she jumped out of, I believe it was a second or third story window, and this is a New York City Police Department case, it's not a recent case. And, you know, she was recognized by President Obama as like an ambassador for human trafficking. So, you know, if anybody takes a point away from today, social media is a problem. Right, we closed Backpage, the federal government seized it, that's great. As Gabrielle said, there's one Backpage, there's BedPage. You know, I can go on and on and on and talk about, you know, illicit websites all day. But on the other end of that, to walk it back from human trafficking, right, because you don't have human sex trafficking. You don't have sex trafficking if you don't have a buyer. Who are those buyers? What do they look like? They look like people's husbands, they look like school teachers, they look like, we've arrested policemen, firemen. It could be anybody, millionaire, hedge fund guy. There's a lot of people that live dual lives, believe it or not. We just grabbed a couple of guys this week, because I also do the catch a predator, and I have females that work for me. They look like they're 12 years old. And they're out there with a whole team of people. We have clandestine locations I'm not going to get into. It's all set up, waiting. And we try to have these gentlemen bring the thing that we spoke about. Oh, you're going to bring me those sneakers? It's all about targeting what somebody wants and or needs. And that's what they do. They, get on that social media and they just friend 1,000 people. If one person falls victim to that, that's too many, right? And this is happening every day, 24 hours a day, from whatever time zone, whatever country. And, lured one from Australia. The case detective is sitting in the back there, David Mills. He did a great job on that case. And, in conjunction with the intelligence division, the European Federal Police, 35 years is a long time. They offered him 10. He thought he would beat it. But all the electronic stuff that he was typing to her, we had it all. And when confronted with that, the jury, but that's one guy. That's one guy. So what is the New York City Police Department doing to target the buyer, right? Because we could arrest women, men, for the crime of prostitution, and we can see that's an age-old crime. It's never going to go away. By us arresting men and or women for the crime of prostitution, we're not going to arrest our way out of the situation. So what are we doing? We're now focusing on the buyers. We're arresting Johns. We'll go out, we'll set up in a hotel, we'll post our own ad on Backpage, which is our one-bed page. We're innovative. We have very savvy people in the New York City Police Department that aren't uniform members that can get us onto these platforms that we post, photos that have been stripped out of metadata, and they're just kind of ambiguous photos of a body part and or two. And there we are in 3 hotel rooms, and when you come to think you're gonna have, buy some sex, you bought, your ticket to jail. Now, with that said, that's great. We could arrest the Johns. How many of those do we get? Some guys don't show up. They're living fantasies in their head. That's what we get also with the child exploitation. Who I see there's some young children. I'm not going to get into that, but people think they're going to come meet young children, whatever gender that might be. And again, we're waiting for them. But we can only target so many people that way. So what my lieutenant, Chris Sharp, who's currently in Europe on another adventure, so he couldn't come with me today, we at the New York City Police Department with the technology division over there, we came up with a thing called the Targeted Communication Deterrence Message, right? So what happens is we have a bunch of, we're innovative as much as the perpetrators are, where they think they're on a phone that's untraceable. And a lot of the phones, I agree, they are untraceable. You can buy that in CVS with $25, and when that $25 goes, so does your phone. So we can research it to a point. So what we do is we have our own phones that are quite clandestine, and we now post an ad again on Backpage. And what we do is we're also working in the field of, I don't know who's familiar with artificial intelligence, right? So I have my undercovers teaching the computer what to say. When somebody says, I want to do A, B, or C, it'll automatically reply D, E, and F. Okay, this price. And what we do is we collect all of those phone numbers, because a lot of these people, wrap it up.
Yeah.
All right. I'll wrap it up. A lot of these people were collecting that data, those phone numbers, so they think that they're looking to get sex and they went unnoticed. And now we're text messaging them back 3 times, 3 random occasions. Now, if that's your husband and or wife, you're seeing this text message that says it's illegal, I have a card, we left some on the table, what that card says. So I'll wrap it up with that.